strange and magical world existed in the untamed lands that were destined to become the United States of America. It was through magic that man transformed the tangible reality into art forms, which left lasting revelations of his presence to our day. The nomadic Eskimo in the far north produced vivid masks to communicate with the spirits. Some were made of wood, others of whalebone. Out of ivory, the Eskimo created mere masterpieces. Many of these were talismans. People in the lush islands of Hawaii were part of the rich Polynesian culture. They learned to utilize many of the materials so lavishly provided by land and sea. This is a wooden pillow. Its graceful designs reveal the work of a skilled craftsman. The Hawaiians made tapa cloth from beaten bark. It was used as clothing, bedding, and for ceremonial purposes. Handsome cloaks for the chiefs were fashioned from feathers. Gods and demigods were carved by artists who were revered for their ability to supply these divinities as well as the other art forms. The Indians on the American mainland also projected many aspects of their daily lives in artistic expression. Indeed, art was an essential part of their existence. In many parts of the country, we find mysterious rock pictures, some 5,000 years old. Two basic techniques were used. One was engraving on stone, referred to as a petroglyph. The other technique was painting on stone, called a pictograph. These rock pictures were often made in conjunction with ceremonies. Since the Indians lacked a written language, they also used pictures as memory aids and as records of important events. The hand, a form of signature, is often the principal motif on rock panels. The totem animals, endowed with human characteristics, were considered the guardians of the family and clan by the Northwestern peoples. In the East, the woodland tribes used the mask in ceremonies for healing and for driving away evil spirits. In the Southwest, in ritual chambers called kivas, we find embodiments of deities as well as sacred rituals dating from 1300. These were painted by the Pueblo people who lived north of the Rio Grande. The earth itself served as a canvas for a unique ceremonial art of sand painting, which continues to this day. Reenactment of these ceremonials kept alive the tribal legends and beliefs. The Kachina dolls represented an infinite variety of supernatural beings. In preparation for the hunt, incantational designs and colors were important. In warfare, these served to give courage and protection to the braves. Musical instruments were elaborately decorated with traditional designs. Even everyday domestic articles displayed high technical and artistic skills. Weaving on looms was one of the several techniques used to produce textiles. These are noted for their bold geometric designs. Because of their mobility, many Indian tribes lavished their artistry on portable objects. They gave special attention to their clothing, by which they proclaimed their social status. Buffalo skins served as history books. During the 16th century, the Spanish had conquered Mexico and moved northward. They had a considerable impact on the Indian culture and left a lasting imprint on the American scene. Mission churches reflect a blending of the Spanish and Indian traditions. In these churches, we find paintings of sacred images known as retablos. These were made by artisans called santeros, meaning saint makers. The retablos, which were also placed in homes, show a fusion of Christian content with the distinct abstract style of the Native Americans. Sculptural forms of saints are called bultos. These figures were carved from wood. Religious themes were prominent. They reveal the dominant feature of Spanish thought, concerned with man's relationship to the divine. During the Spanish colonial period, the Catholic Church was the greatest influence on the natives. A system of missions which spread throughout the Southwest perpetuated the welding of Spanish and Indian cultures. The last of these missions was built in California. When the English settlers arrived in the 17th century, they brought along a new kind of art, secular in nature. It was noted for portraiture, the only kind of easel painting which the Puritans could accept as being useful. The painting of Mrs. Frakey and Baby Mary is one example of New England art which shows only transplanted European traditions. There was no assimilation of cultures, as in the case of the Spanish. Because survival and the settlement of the new land were priorities, the early painters were jacks of all trades. Captain Thomas Smith, who did this self-portrait, was a seagoing man as well as a painter. But besides portraits, artists also painted signboards, a necessity when street addresses were unknown. Some of them designed tombstones. Others became early interior decorators. They painted murals. They designed elaborate furniture. Some of the artists even painted coaches. The artistic tradition of portraiture in the manner of Flemish painter Anthony van Dyck began to permeate the English colonies in the beginning of the 18th century, mainly through imported reproductions and original canvases, and through the immigration of well-trained artists. Among the first of these was the Scottish painter John Smibert, who arrived in Boston in 1730 and became the city's most popular painter. His portraits, with their display of technical skill, opened up new vistas for the native artists of New England. Besides portraits, Smibert designed Faneuil Hall, Boston's market and meeting place, known to history as the Cradle of Liberty. John Singleton Copley, a professional artist at 14, was probably the first genius New England produced in any of the arts. In his portrait of silversmith Paul Revere, the self-taught Copley repudiated the aristocratic belief that manual work was a disgrace. He broke precedent by painting Revere in shirt sleeves. In his search for perfection, Copley did not hesitate to learn from European masters, and at times would copy from reproductions everything but the head of his sitter. Copley, one of the first Americans to earn his living solely by painting, complained he had so many commissions that he hardly had time to eat. Nevertheless, he left for England to improve his skills even more and to escape the upheavals of the American Revolution. Watson and a Shark told the story of a real event. Watson was a London businessman who commissioned Copley to reenact the tragic event of his losing a leg to a shark in Havana Harbor. The scene of a man confronting the jaws of death was unique for Copley's time. It shows pity and horror for its own sake. Benjamin West, the first American painter to achieve international fame, had already been established in London before Copley's arrival there. West had been appointed historical painter to George III of England. West was a brilliant teacher, though he himself was self-taught. His school produced many important American artists. He was also influential as the president of the Royal Academy in London. This is one of West's early paintings. Everyone considered him a genius. From his childhood, he was assured that his talent for painting would someday make him a fit companion for kings. West painted many portraits, but his real interest was historical painting. One of these, Penn's Treaty with the Indians, is remarkable for the fact that he dressed Penn and his people in costumes of their own period. Until West, the accepted rule for European masters was to present historical figures in Greek or Roman dress, regardless of the time or place. Another American, Gilbert Stuart, who had studied with West, set up his own studio in London. He became a very popular portrait painter, but he squandered all his money. In order to avoid being put in debtor's prison, he was forced to return to America. To hush up the disgrace, he claimed that he had voluntarily returned to paint George Washington. He won immediate recognition in his homeland. Nearly everyone of importance sat for him. His paintings disclose his ability to capture fleeting facial expressions and momentary gestures. They also show that he had freed himself from docile imitation of English artists. The versatile Charles Willson Peale is another artist who studied with West. He established one of the world's first scientific museums of natural history, in which he painted himself at the age of 82. Everything intrigued him. His family, whom he had painted at an earlier time, was horrified when Peale in his 80s cavorted down the hills on one of America's first bicycles. Peale believed that anyone could paint and tried to prove it by his many relatives. One of them was his brother James, who became an excellent miniaturist. James Peale painted this elegant portrait of Jane Rover, holding one of his tiny masterpieces. Mrs. Crane was painted by James' daughter, Sarah. And this painting of George Washington is by Rembrandt Peale, who was a son of Charles. After having achieved independence, the country had been caught up in a spirit of nationalism, which precipitated a hero worship. National figures became the favored models for American artists. The father of the country obviously became the most popular subject. Washington by Emanuel Leutze. Washington by John Trumbull. Washington and His Family by Edward Savage. The ingenious Benjamin Franklin was another figure who inspired many artists. And there were, of course, many portraits of Thomas Jefferson, an artist in his own right. Similarly, there was a brief period of historical paintings after the newly won independence. John Trumbull is the artist best remembered for a pictorial record of the American Revolution. The surrender of General Burgoyne at Saratoga. The surrender of Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown. The resignation of General Washington. The Declaration of Independence was the most ambitious and probably the best known of his historical series. Trumbull painted Jefferson in Paris, Adams in London, and he traveled along the Atlantic seaboard to get the likenesses of others. He strove for historical accuracy, which Benjamin West, his teacher, had stressed so much. Another subject which gained popularity after the Revolution was maritime painting. This was in a period of great growth in American trade. Proud ship owners commissioned artists to depict their vessels. Thus, we have an interesting pictorial record of naval and merchant ship paintings, from sailing boats to steamships, throughout the 19th century. Whaling ships particularly carried the stars and stripes through many oceans and contributed to making the United States a leading power on the seas. It was on these ships that scrimshaw, an original American folk art, came into being. Scrimshaw was carved on whales' teeth by the whalers. The leisure time on the 3- and 4-year whaling voyages brought out the artists in many of these seafaring men. Although primarily a sailor's art, some of the captains' wives who went along on these long and dangerous trips practiced the same unique craft. The teeth, won in fierce battles with the giant whales, were symbols of courage and triumph. For many years past, wrote Melville in his novel Moby Dick, the whale ship has been the pioneer in ferreting out the remotest and least known parts of the earth. This pioneering drive formed the American spirit, which would continue to explore the unknown. And the American artist was there to give form to this spirit.